Well, joining us now for more in the studio is Paulo Sotero, Director of the Brazil Institute of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. From Sao Paulo, Daniel Bramatti is a reporter for O Estrado de Sao Paulo. That's a newspaper. Via Skype from Sao Paulo, Felipe Altenfelder works with Circuito Fora do Eixo. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Felipe, let me ask you first. You're a young Brazilian, unhappy with the direction the country is taking. What would you like to see happen in Brazil?
Well, first of all, good night, Anand, and everybody that's watching CCTV. I think that we are living a very complex moment. To try to be very direct to answer your question, I'm talking from a point of view that it's like from a militant from the left wing, and we think that to respond to this crisis context, government should ampliate the dialogue with the social movements and generate a favorable environment to develop a more progressist agenda, dialoguing more with human rights, with culture, communication, environment. And this is kind of the totally opposite way that the protesters that went to the streets last Sunday are asking their demands, So there's a polarization going on, and I think that if you ask to anybody from the left wing, the question is how can government find answers to try to somehow move over historical political alliance with the conservative force that are holding this agenda.
Okay, there are many protesters who are calling for President Dilma Rousseff to resign. They're very unhappy with her being the president. She was democratically elected. Do you support that call for her to resign?
No, I think that we need to be very careful with a very youth democracy as we have in Brazil. So that is not the way it works. Like just after 2 months, the election, you have a clearly cooperation, between the parties that lose the election with the massive media to try to generate this environment. So I know that we have images with lots of people in the streets, in the main cities, but if we really look to the numbers, we are talking of less than 1% of the Brazilian population, And if you take a zoom in to these protests, if you don't look just the number of people, you're going to see that there are lots of signs and people asking for things like military intervention.
Yeah.
Like xenophobical or, like homophobical or racist speeches. So it's something serious that is happening now. The left is feeling that our democracy somehow is being threatened by this process.
Felipe, are we going to see more protests in Brazil?
Sorry?
Are we going to see more protests like this in Brazil?
Yeah, I think that we need to analyze a shortly historical period that came since 2011. When somehow Brazil tried to connect with the whole global spring discussion. And there was a phase of protests where people tried to be doing more party on the streets, like celebrating during the protests. And this was what generated the environment that brings us to June of 2013. When we got the big wave of protests that started with the fight against the raise of the bus fare, and that became something for much more than that. In this moment, the Brazilian right wing learned how to go to the streets, and once that they have the massive media cooperating with them, it's easy for them now, to call people to the streets. It's just keep talking about corruption every day. But they are not being impartial. They're just talking about corruption on the Workers' Party, when corruption is something of the Brazilian political system, and they really don't want to change it on the roots,
Okay, let me bring Paulo in. Paulo, let's look at the situation in Brazil right now. Last week, the ratings agency Moody's set Brazil's credit rating to near junk bond status. Inflation right now at a 12-year high. How much trouble is the country in?
It's in very deep trouble, and the problem is that we are now in a recession, which is unusual for Brazil. Not only we are in a recession right now, we apparently are going to be continuing to be in a recession next year. Those are projections made this past weekend by a series of analysts, and this is the tough reality of the country. The country was basically mismanaged economically in the first term of President Dilma Rousseff. This was not debated, acknowledged during the campaign. She campaigned promising to continue a policy and denouncing her opponents because she said they would implement austerity measures, etc. She gets reelected by a margin of 3% and adopts precisely the program that she was denouncing before, creating obviously an enormous mistrust, a lack of confidence, a rejection that now leaves her with 8% of approval rating, the lowest in recorded history in Brazil, and with an enormous problem of legitimacy. She is the legal president of Brazil. There is no doubt about it, but there is now a growing problem, discussion about legitimacy, and on top of this, you have a corruption scandal that took place under her watch and under the watch of the Workers' Party. And although President Dilma Rousseff is seen by many people, including some in the opposition, as personally honest, she obviously bears a degree of responsibility to what happened under her watch with Petrobras.
Right, she is the leader, and I guess the point that has to be made is no matter what's the margin, she was elected president. Let's go to Daniel. Daniel, what is your sense of the political mood in Brazil right now? I mean, as Paulo pointed out as well, that, you know, people are calling for the removal of a democratically elected president. There's anger in the country.
Yeah, people are very angry. Felipe mentioned that only 1% of the population went to the streets, but that is not a whole picture. We have 2/3 of Brazilians calling for her impeachment, for the impeachment of the president. And so we have, some people say we are living a perfect storm because we have this economical situation that Paulo perfectly described, and we also have a political crisis. Dilma has lost support in the lower house of the parliament, and now she has a deal with the chairman, the president of the Senate. But the situation is very tense, and we don't see an ending on this. We don't have any possibility of resolve this in a short period of time.
Let's bring in Bernardo Sorj. He joins us from Rio de Janeiro. He's a professor at the University of Sao Paulo. And Bernardo, what is your reading of the situation in the country right now? Is President Rousseff to blame for this?
Of course, she has direct responsibility for an electoral campaign where she presented a complete unrealistic view of the economic situation of Brazil, did promises that couldn't fulfill, and in this direct sense, she has, of course, part of the direct responsibility for the crisis of legitimacy. She has also direct responsibility for the economic situation because during the last year of her first mandate, she spent it in a way that was completely irresponsible. Also, in this sense, she is part of the crisis and responsible for the crisis. The second issue, of course, is if that means that should be impeached or not. Personally, I don't think so. I don't think that a president should be impeached because people voted for her, even under false promises. There should be a more strong legal reason for that. I think that impeachment is a juridical figure of democracy and can be used, is not anti-democratic, but should be considered very carefully because still is a trauma for any democratic regime, an impeachment.